antagonistic muscle pairs, and then we'll look over the knee joint. Okay. So last week we went over where these muscles are located as well as what their functions are. The purpose of this week is to pair them in antagonistic pairs. So muscles that perform the same motion are agonists. Trapezius and splenius capitis perform extension at the neck joint. They are antagonists with sternocleidomastoid, which performs flexion at the neck joint. So sternocleidomastoid is an antagonist to trapezius. Sternocleidomastoid is an antagonist to splenius capitis. The next set of antagonists are we're going to look at flexing and extending the trunk. So flexing the trunk is touching your toes, and that can be performed by any of these muscle pairs. So we have rectus abdominis. If you contract rectus abdominis, it will flex the trunk, as well as psoas major and iliacus. And psoas major and iliacus make up that iliopsoas muscle group. I have a few muscles here in parentheses. So these three muscles are called prime movers. This trunk flexion is their major muscle action. External and internal oblique, yes, they do perform trunk flexion, but they also perform trunk rotation. So if we asked you an antagonist of erector spinae, and you gave me any of these 5 answers, it would be correct. However, on the reverse, I would only ask you if I'm labeling like a trunk flexor, I'm only going to label one of these 3 as a trunk flexor to ask what the antagonist would be. So I'll always give you kind of the benefit of the doubt, or the most possible answer choices if it's an answer choice. And then I'm trying to limit the ones that you need to know for going from trunk flexion to trunk extension. So psoas major, iliacus, rectus abdominis, these are agonists of each other, and their antagonist for all 3 of them is the erector spinae group. Okay. At the shoulder, we have flexion, bringing the arm forward, and the 2 muscles that accomplish that are pectoralis major and biceps brachii. Their antagonists are latissimus dorsi and triceps brachii. For flexion of the arm at the elbow, we have biceps brachii, and its antagonist is triceps brachii. For flexing at the hip, we have, so this is bringing the head of the femur up towards the trunk. We have psoas major, iliacus, and rectus femoris. So, and then for extending the thigh at the hip, so pulling that leg back, we have gluteus maximus. So these 3 are antagonists of gluteus maximus. And then if we are looking at the leg, we have at the knee, we have for flexion, we have those 3 hamstrings. We have biceps femoris, semitendinosus, and semimembranosus. And then for extending the knee, the quadriceps group, rectus femoris, vastus lateralis, and vastus medialis. And then if you go deep to rectus femoris, vastus intermedius. At the ankle, we have soleus and gastrocnemius doing plantar flexion. their antagonist is tibialis anterior performing dorsiflexion. You do need to complete the lab manual pages. Okay, so there are pages in the lab manual. If you actually have an orange lab manual, the pages 38 and 39 for the antagonist muscle pairs, and then for the knee, they're 41, 42. Yeah, just pages 41 and 42. So the lab manual is very good at also identifying the muscle pairs that you need to know as antagonists. So it's under, if you don't, yeah, you were given the option of you could actually purchase a hard copy and pick it up at the bookstore, or it's in your shell under biology lab guide. So they're also provided electronically here. So for each one of the labs, you should be reviewing and completing the lab pages that are associated with each of the labs. Okay, so the lab guide is provided for you in digital format, or if you wanted a hard copy, you can pick it up from the bookstore. Okay. But I definitely do recommend that you are going over these and completing these for each of the labs, because there's, if you get to this week's, okay, so it has all these articulations that you need to know for the appendicular skeleton from 2 weeks ago, and that will be on the lab exam. So these articulations will be on the lab exam, and then it has a list of all the muscles that you need to know. And then for this week, see, it has all of these. And then for this week, it has the pairs that you need to know. So you need to know that that sternocleidomastoid flexes the head, and splenius capitis and trapezius extend the head, and that sternocleidomastoid and splenius capitis are antagonists, sternocleidomastoid and trapezius are antagonists. So the information from the lab guide is important to know, especially for the lab exam, because that's where the information for the lab exam is taken from. And then the pictures are taken from that photo atlas. That is over here for skeletal muscle, and then in the lab test exam reviews as well. So our last set of antagonists are looking at abduction and adduction. So abduction is to take away from the body, and adduction is to bring it back towards the body. So at the shoulder, we have deltoid that abducts, and then we have latissimus dorsi, which adducts, brings the arm back. At the hip, we have gluteus medius, will abduct the leg at the hip. And then we have gracilis, which is in the middle of that adductor group. So going down the middle of the thigh, we have gracilis in the middle, and then we have adductor magnus, longus, and brevis, which are going to comprise that adductor group. They'll be on either side of gracilis. For the knee joint, you do need to know the 4 bones that are present at the knee joint. So the femur and the tibia are the only 2 that articulate. So we'll talk about articulations next, but the 4 bones are the femur, the tibia, the fibula, which is on the lateral side. So remember, this is lateral, and this one is going to be medial. And that's important to remember because when we're talking, and then we're also going to be talking about ligaments and meniscus, and those are going to be, you're going to need to know, in order to properly identify the collateral ligaments as well as the menisci, you'll need to remember that the fibula is on the lateral side and the tibia is on that medial side. And then the patella, your kneecap, makes up that 4th bone. And the patella is going to slide along that patellar surface. So the 4 bones of the knee joint are the femur, the tibia, the fibula indirectly, and then the patella. You also need to know the sets of articulations. So we have 3 articulations. The first one is going to be, if you go to the tibia, which is that medial bone, the first articulation is the medial condyle of the femur. Then we have our medial meniscus, and then we have the medial condyle of the tibia. The second articulation is the lateral condyle of the femur to the lateral meniscus to the lateral condyle of the tibia. And then our third articulation is, our third articulation is going to be the patella with the patellar surface of the femur. Okay. So 3 articulations, those medial condyle to medial condyle, lateral condyle to lateral condyle, and then the patella with the patellar surface of the femur. For the ligaments that are going to stabilize the knee, so the knee is relatively unstable. There's actually a fair amount of movement that occurs at the knee. There are a lot of supporting ligaments, and we will be looking at 4 of those. We have the quadriceps tendon. So the quadriceps tendon is coming down from rectus femoris, so king of the femur. And so tendons connect muscles to bones. So it's the connective tissue that is, it's an indirect attachment that is going to connect to the patella. And then we have coming down from the patella to the tibial tuberosity, we have, sometimes it's called the patellar tendon, and sometimes it's called the patellar ligament. It really depends on if anatomists consider it an extension from the quadriceps tendon all the way down, and the patella just gets embedded in the middle, or if it's a new structure originating from the patella to the tibia tuberosity. And that's kind of the popular point of view right now, is that it is a unique tendon from the patella, or a unique ligament from the patella to the tibial tuberosity. So normally you'll hear it referred to as the patellar ligament. We do have two collateral ligaments. So collateral means side. So you've probably heard of collateral damage. Collateral is side, so side damage. And here we're just talking about collateral ligaments. These are on the side. And these form bands, okay? You do need to know what type of displacement it prevents. So the collateral tibial ligament is also sometimes called the medial collateral ligament, the MCL. It prevents medial displacement. You'll hear both of those terms. In your lab exam, it will always be referred to as the collateral tibial ligament because we're trying to give you a hint that it is the one on that attaches to the tibia. But if you're at an orthopedist, they will also often call it the medial collateral ligament because they're more concerned usually with function, and this is preventing medial displacement. On the lateral side, we have the lateral collateral ligament, also known as the collateral fibular ligament. So it's on the side and it connects to the fibula. And the collateral fibular ligament prevents lateral displacement. So it prevents the knee moving this direction towards the lateral side. So you need to know these structures. You need to know the collateral tibial ligament prevents medial displacement. The collateral fibular ligament prevents lateral displacement. We're going to talk about the cruciate ligaments as well. The cruciate ligaments act like anchors. Okay, so they anchor a part of the knee, and the anterior cruciate ligament is going to anchor from the front. So they're named by where you see them. If you see them from the anterior side, which you know this is anterior because you can see the patella. If it's a view where you see the patella, it's looking at it, the knee straight on. And so this is the ACL, and it anchors from this point here, and it prevents the knee from moving backward. So that's why it gets ruptured so often, because we'll get a hard blow from the front in like sports, and the knee will try and move back. The ACL tries to prevent that backwards movement, and before contact sports, we just didn't have a lot of that. Our knee just wasn't really designed for contact sports. So that ACL is what gets damaged a lot because we're not used to forward blows. It just weren't designed that way. Okay. The posterior cruciate ligament is, you observe it from the back side. So if we're looking at the femur from the posterior side, we see these very large condyles. We know this is the medial one and this is the lateral one because of where the fibula is. So the fibula on the knee model always gives us the lateral side. It's our landmark. The posterior cruciate ligament acts like an anchor on the back, and it holds that knee taut on the back, and it prevents forward movement. And it doesn't get injured nearly as often. Okay. So we have our ACL on the front is going to prevent backwards movement. Our PCL on the back is going to prevent forward movement at the knee joint. So this is a review of the out of the way. This is a review of the structures that you need to know. You need to know the femur, the tibia, the fibula, and the patella. You need to know the three articulations of the medial condyle of the femur to the medial condyle of the tibia. And in between is a disc of fibrocartilage called the medial meniscus. Our second articulation is the lateral condyle of the femur to the lateral condyle of the tibia, and separating those is a disc of fibrocartilage called the lateral meniscus. The third articulation occurs between the patella and the patellar surface of the femur. The supporting ligaments and tendon that you need to know are the quadriceps tendon coming down from rectus femoris, and then if this were not retracted, it would continue from be the patellar ligament going from the patella down to the tibial tuberosity. The four supporting ligaments that are left are the tibial collateral ligament that is going to be on this medial side, and the fibular collateral ligament on the lateral side. The tibial collateral prevents medial displacement. The fibular collateral prevents lateral displacement. We also have the ACL, anterior cruciate ligament, is visible from the anterior side, and it prevents backwards, posterior movement. The posterior cruciate ligament, we would show you a posterior view of the knee, and it would prevent forward or anterior movement. The knee is also supported by tendons. So the quadriceps tendon on the front, but then on the back, it is going to be supported by the tendons of the hamstrings group. So on the lateral side, the tendon from biceps femoris comes around to stabilize. And then on the medial side, we have a very large tendon that's how semitendinosus gets its name, is it has this very large stabilizing tendon, and then semimembranosus has a tendon that helps to stabilize the joint as well. So the knee is also heavily stabilized by tendons of the hamstrings group. For articulations, I don't know if you've gone to joints in lecture or not, but the types of joints that occur, and this is good to know because there's a good chance that you'll see portions of these on the lab exam, we'll start with the patellar to the femur. So the patella slides or glides over that patellar surface. And the type of joint is called a plane joint. It's a non-axial joint. It has this gliding motion. So the patella to the femur, the joint type is plane, P-L-A-N-E. It's a geometry term. And it's non-axial, meaning that it glides. So it kind of just glides over the surface. The tibia to the femur is considered a hinge joint. It's considered a modified hinge joint because it allows some rotation. But for simplicity's sake, for the lab exam, we consider it a uniaxial hinge joint that allows the movements of flexion and extension. the muscles that are going to be controlling that hinge joint are going to be for flexing, so decreasing the joint angle on that posterior side of the leg. We have the 3 hamstrings. We have biceps femoris running by itself to the lateral side, and then we have our best friends, semitendinosus and semimembranosus, that always run together to the medial side. On the front of our leg, we have that large quadriceps group with rectus femoris sitting right on top. And then if you remove rectus femoris, you can see vastus intermedius underneath, and it is bordered by vastus medialis on the medial side and vastus lateralis on the lateral side. And the quadriceps group will extend the knee, so it will increase the joint angle at the knee. Hamstrings are antagonists to quadriceps. Quadriceps are antagonists to hamstrings. So know this well. So as I mentioned, make sure you complete the lab pages. Antagonist muscles, there's 2 pages for that. And then there's 2 pages for the knee joint. You may want to use colored pencils to color those in if you print them out. If not, you can draw on them electronically. I do have, I think it's 13-minute video that goes over all of this. Oh, there's 2 videos. One's only a minute, and then there's another one that's 13. And then the test review is just over the knee joint, so it's not too long.
Movement of the skeleton often involves pairs of muscles that perform opposing actions, like flexing and extending or bending and straightening. Muscles involved in these paired actions are categorized as agonists and antagonists. A muscle that contracts to generate the main force of an action is called the prime mover, or the agonist for that action. Muscles that perform the paired and opposing action are called the antagonists. The agonists in elbow flexion are the muscles that contract to bring the elbow joint into a flexed position. The antagonists are the muscles that perform the opposite action, elbow extension. When the action of elbow extension occurs, the roles switch. The triceps brachii is now the agonist and contracts to extend the limb, while the biceps brachii muscle is relaxed and becomes the antagonist. Muscle interactions throughout body regions involve paired actions. These include flexion and extension, elevation and depression, and pronation and supination.
Like, share, and subscribe this channel for updated news.
So the one thing that it does forget is that the other paired action is abduction and adduction. But other than that, it's a very well done video.
Okay, so for today's lab, we are going to go over antagonist muscle pairs. These are pairs of muscles that have opposite actions. The first set of muscle pairs are going to perform neck flexion and neck extension. The muscle that performs neck flexion is sternocleidomastoid. It has 2 antagonists. The upper section of trapezius and splenius capitis. Both splenius capitis and trapezius will extend the head at the neck. The next group of muscles will focus on trunk flexion and trunk extension. There are three muscles that perform trunk flexion. The first is rectus abdominis. Then we have the iliopsoas group made up of psoas major and iliacus. The antagonist of these three muscles is the erector spinae group, made up of longissimus and spinalis. The next group of muscles will look at shoulder flexion and extension. Shoulder flexion is performed by pectoralis major and biceps brachii. Shoulder extension is performed by latissimus dorsi and triceps brachii. Flexion of the forearm at the elbow is performed by biceps brachii. Extension of the forearm at the elbow is performed by triceps brachii. Flexion of the thigh at the hip is performed by iliacus, psoas major, as well as rectus femoris. Extension of the thigh at the hip is performed by gluteus maximus. Extension of the leg at the knee is performed by the quadriceps group. Rectus femoris, vastus medialis, vastus intermedius, and vastus lateralis. Flexion of the leg at the knee is performed by the hamstrings group. Biceps femoris on the lateral side, semitendinosus and semimembranosus on the medial side. Plantar flexion is performed by gastrocnemius and soleus. Dorsiflexion is performed by tibialis anterior. So soleus and gastrocnemius are antagonized by tibialis anterior. So let's move on to some abduction and adduction antagonists. Abduction and adduction antagonists at the shoulder are deltoid performs abduction at the shoulder. It is antagonized by latissimus dorsi, which is an adductor of the shoulder. At the hip, gluteus medius is a hip abductor, and it is antagonized by gracilis, which is a hip adductor, as well as the adductor group. For the second part of lab, we need to go over the knee joint. The knee joint is composed of four bones: the femur, the tibia, the fibula, and the patella. So the knee has many ligaments. Some that we will be looking at are the fibular collateral ligament, the tibial collateral ligament, and this is looking at the knee joint from the posterior aspect. So this is also showing us the posterior cruciate ligament, as well as the medial meniscus, the lateral meniscus,
Hello, Dr. Carter here. In the last recording, we looked at the first joint of the lower limb proper, the hip joint. Now, we will be discussing the knee joint. The knee is the largest joint in the human body, and it's also the most superficial. You can palpate almost the whole thing. The knee is a synovial joint, and it acts like a hinge, allowing the joint to move almost exclusively in flexion and extension. But the knee can make some other relatively small medial and lateral rotations, seen here. These are best seen when the knee is bent. Let's return now to our bones. For such an important joint, allowing us to walk and sit and stand, it is surprisingly weak. And this is in part due to the wide range of permitted flexion, and partly because of the inherent instability of having curved surfaces of the femoral condyles sitting on the flat tibia. The knee joint is kept stable by the ligaments and tendons which attach the femur to the tibia and by the muscles surrounding it. Although actually relatively little muscle mass is part of the knee, these provide the majority of the support. The straight or erect knee position, extended here as we see it, is the most stable position of the knee joint. Think of standing. You don't tend to wobble. The knee is basically locked. Externally, the joint capsule is strengthened and supported by three major ligaments: the patellar tendon, the medial collateral ligament, and the lateral collateral ligament. On a side note, the synovial patellofemoral joint is considered part of the knee, but we're focusing more on the basics here. The patellar ligament is the continuation of the quadriceps femoris tendon, and it's the most anterior ligament of the knee joint. When the knee is erect, the two collateral ligaments are tensed, providing strong support to the joint. As the knee bends, they loosen and release, and this is what allows for the small amount of medial and lateral rotation I mentioned earlier when the knee is bent. So the two collateral ligaments are first the more rope-like lateral collateral ligament. This is also known as the fibular collateral ligament, obviously because it sits on the lateral side and it runs from the femur at the lateral epicondyle to the fibula, hence its other name. This is a really important key concept here. Although this ligament attaches here, the fibula itself is not considered a bone of the knee joint. The second ligament is the medial collateral ligament, also known as the tibial collateral ligament. Now, unlike its counterpart, it's really flat and more like a band, and it runs from the medial epicondyle of the femur to the tibia. Inside of the joint capsule, we have the cruciate ligaments and the menisci. Remember, cruciate is Latin for cross, and that's exactly what the cruciate ligaments do. They cross each other within the joint capsule, but outside of the synovial cavity. This is best seen from above, as we're looking here. When the knee is bent or flexed, as I mentioned, the collateral ligaments become slack, so it's the cruciate ligaments that are vital for holding the femoral and tibial articular surfaces together. A key concept here is that the cruciate ligaments are named for where they originate on the tibial plateau. Therefore, the anterior cruciate ligament, commonly known as the ACL, arises from the tibia at the anterior intercondylar area, seen here. Whereas the posterior cruciate ligament, or PCL, arises from the posterior intercondylar area. The articular surface of the tibia are two crescent-shaped plates of fibrocartilage, the medial and lateral menisci, and these partly act as shock absorbers. And that's it. That's the knee.
Okay, so all we have left is our lab test review. So which number is the fibular collateral ligament?
3.
Yep. And I'm going to scooch this over a little bit. And which is the tibial collateral ligament?
2.
And which one is the patellar tendon or ligament?
1.
So the patellar tendon or ligament is actually number 4. And then the quadriceps tendon is number
1.
Yep. And this bone marking is the tibial tuberosity. Okay. So this is looking at the knee from the beginning, or from the front. Which number is the lateral meniscus?
1.
And that makes the medial meniscus should be number,
2.
yes. I know, here's a little confusing, but it should just be the number 2, as shown over here. Okay, so we have which number is our ACL?
1.
And that makes PCL number
2.
2. Very good. So anterior cruciate ligament is on the front, posterior cruciate ligament originates on the back, on the posterior. So we have, okay, so this bone is the
Fibula.
which makes this structure the fibular collateral ligament. And that makes this the which meniscus?
Lateral.
Yep. So we are now, so this says a medial view of the right knee. So now we're looking at the knee from the medial aspect. So that makes, which ligament is this? It starts at this bone, so it's called the tibial, and it's on the side. So the second word is
Medial. Collateral.
collateral ligament. So tibial collateral ligament. This makes this the which meniscus?
Medial.
And then it's asking what bone is this?
The patella.
It's the kneecap, which is also known as the
Patella.
patella. Very good. Okay, so this is looking at the knee from the front. So it says anterior view of the knee. This is looking for a bone marking of the femur, known as the what surface?
Patellar.
Yep, known as a patellar surface because the patella slides along it. That means this bone is the
Patella.
And you can barely see it, but there is a cruciate ligament in here, and since it's the front, this was the
ACL.
ACL. Very good. This bone is what?
The tibia.
And then this is looking for the ligament that's coming from here. So it's called the
Patellar ligament.
Yep, patellar ligament. And then down here, it would be attaching at the
Tuberosity.
Yep, that's right, the tibial tuberosity. Very good. Okay, so again, this is looking at the anterior aspect. This is a more magnified view looking at the
ACL.
Yep, which some of you may have injured at one point in time. Okay, so this is a lateral view. So this bone is the
Fibula.
Which makes this the which meniscus?
The lateral.
Yep. Okay, so now we're looking at the knee from the back, so posterior view. We have identified this bone, so that makes this the what ligament?
The fibula.
Fibular,
Collateral.
collateral ligament. Yep. And then this makes this, which meniscus is this?
The lateral.
Which makes this one the,
Medial.
and then if this is the medial meniscus, what bone marking is this of the femur?
Medial condyle.
Yep, very good. Okay, so what bone is this?
Patella.
And then we have this large bone here, which makes this ligament the
Tibular.
tibia,
Tibial collateral.
tibial collateral ligament. Yep. Coming down from the patella, we do have that patellar ligament that ends at the tibial tuberosity here. This is that tibial collateral ligament. And since we know the tibia is on the medial side, and then we see medial view, this is what structure?
The medial meniscus.
Yep. Okay. So it says quadriceps group and the hamstrings group on these legs. So you need to know their muscle actions and you need to know their muscle names. So the quadriceps group performs what muscle action at the knee?
Extension.
Yes. So quadriceps are knee extenders, or they perform knee extension at the knee. And on top, we have king of the femur, known as?
The quadricep.
So this singular muscle is rectus
Yeah.
femoris. And then underneath, it would have deep to rectus femoris is, can you remember? Vastus intermedius. So over here we have vastus medialis, and then over here we have vastus lateralis. So make sure you do know those four muscles of the quadriceps because you'll probably be seeing them again. So the hamstrings perform knee what?
Flexion.
Yes. And on to the lateral side, we have biceps femoris. And then we have our two friends that run together to the medial side. On top is semitendinosus, and it's got a really pronounced tendon. And then peeking out on either side on most models, including ours, is semimembranosus. So make sure you can identify those three muscles individually as well. Because we've gone over it in the last lab and this lab, there will be multiple questions identifying individual muscles, identifying them as a group, identifying their muscle actions. And then if I were to draw an arrow here, sorry, and I'm talking about this muscle right here. My arrow went a little far. I might say, what is muscle X? And you would need to tell me it is rectus femoris and give me an antagonist. And you would need to name either biceps femoris, semitendinosus, or semimembranosus. So the lab exam tends to have two-part questions saying what is muscle X and what is an antagonist of muscle X. So if we were looking, at the neck joint, we might have sternocleidomastoid, labeled as muscle X. And we might say, what is this muscle? You would say sternocleidomastoid. And then what is an antagonist? And you'd also need to provide trapezius or splenius capitis. We could also ask, what does this muscle do as a muscle action? And this one is flexion. Of course, these are extensors and these are flexors. So there's a lot of different questions that can be done just using the same model. So do get very comfortable with the muscles, the muscle actions, and then an antagonist to the specified muscles that are in the PowerPoint and also in your lab manual. Okay, so it says when the knee receives a lateral blow, which commonly occurs, lots of soccer injuries, lots of football injuries, apparently hockey injuries too. There are three structures that are commonly injured. And those three structures are
the ACL,
Yep.
medial meniscus,
Yep.
and forgot the other one.
Look at the bone it's attached to.
The tibia,
Yep.
something.
Yep. So the ACL, medial meniscus, and the tibial collateral ligament.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to say.
Yes, I know. So these three are the, I think they're called like the unhappy triad of knee injuries. Housemaid's knee is also called water on the knee. It's an inflammation, but it is actually prepatellar bursitis. So there are things called bursa. They are discs that are meant to reduce friction, and they can get inflamed. So they just with rest, it will subside. But so that is prepatellar bursitis. Okay. So that is all we have actually for today.